Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here. And honestly, I'll probably just hate you anyway, so go ahead and recommend me the books. I don't care. Also, I got to point out, and I said I wasn't going to go off script, but I'm going off script already. I happened to notice that every other speaker had these like beautiful generated images with the long flowing hair, and I know that the one bald guy in the lineup had a hat on, so that's not really fair. Anyway, again, my name is Simon MacDonald. If you need to get a hold of me, like hit me up on Mastodon because I won't go on Twitter anymore. Oh my God, that is terrible. That is a tire fire. You don't want to be there. Also, this is my infinite Simon slide. So that's me at a presentation with me in a presentation with me in a presentation, all the way back like over 40 things. And basically, I work for a small company called Begin. We're a startup. Yesterday, Lemon was talking about wanting to have a GUI so you could click around and do a whole bunch of things. But if you've ever been inside the AWS console, you probably don't want to use that GUI because there's like 160 different things that you have to choose from, and we make that easier. And honestly, I only said that so I could justify my trip to Malaga. So thanks for listening to that. All right, agendas are always good to have, so we have our agenda of what I'm going to be talking about today, and if you're wondering where we're at, just look at where the penny farthing is. If you don't know what a penny farthing is, that's what we have Google for. Anyway, what are web components? Well, web components are a suite of different technologies, and the suite of different technologies is what's important there, and it allows you to build reusable custom elements. So all of that functionality gets encapsulated away so that it doesn't damage other parts of your page. So that's great. So, I mean, obviously, I'm talking about React, right? Hell no, I'm not talking about React today. I'm sorry, it's not what it's going to be about. But let's just address that elephant in the room right away. Because React is great, but it's not web components. So React, when we look at it, you are able to build reusable components with it, and that's great. It also provides you with DOM syncing, and that's a fantastic piece of functionality that React does. It can be stateful on the client side, depending upon what state library you pick up, but it's not part of the platform. Whereas web components also give you the ability to build reusable components. They're interoperable, which means you can use them in any kind of framework because they're part of the platform, they're part of the web. And they are accessible generally by default because, again, they're just HTML elements. And the most important part is they are part of the platform. So I have a question for everybody in the audience today. Hands up, have you used jQuery before? Okay, it's kind of hard to see with the lights, but I think most of the audience has put up their hand. Now, a second question. If you were starting a new project today, would you use jQuery? Okay, so there's about 5 people here that are WordPress developers, and I salute you. So that's great. But, okay, jQuery was awesome. We took all of the problems that we had with all of the different browsers, and it smoothed over them, and it gave us this wonderful ability to do query selections. But today, nobody really reaches for jQuery when they're starting a new project. And the reason that is, all of the best parts of jQuery ended up into the web platform itself. So, my question to you, and probably the most important thing out of today, is when you're looking at starting a new project, why are you reaching for heavyweight JavaScript frameworks when a lot of that stuff has landed in the platform itself in the form of web components? Anyway, so just think about that. I'll get off my soapbox now. That's a lot. I'm going to still talk down to you. Anyway, what are web components part 2? Basically, what I said before, they're a suite of specifications, and these are going to be the 3 specifications that you can depend upon in any of the evergreen browsers. So custom elements, that's the ability for you to be able to say, hey, this is my new tag, and all web components have to have a dash inside of them because you can't have a single word component because those are reserved for the platform itself, just in case we want to add a new HTML element. So anyway, this allows you to define new elements. And because the web is amazing and it's backwards and forwards compatible, even if something goes wrong and you have something like my-button, the browser will just go, I don't know what to do with this, I'm just going to treat it as a span, and the rest of your page still works. So that's a fantastic part about it. And then we have the shadow DOM. The shadow DOM allows you to just basically have a completely different DOM tree separate from the main light DOM tree in your web application. And then you can put additional content in there and additional CSS that doesn't affect the rest of your page. And also, things don't cross over the light DOM to shadow DOM boundary, with a few exceptions. There's always exceptions. But basically, you can have the styles of the button for your entire page and the style of a button inside of your web component, and never the twain shall meet. And then, of course, we have HTML templates. HTML templates give you a way of defining reusable content on your page, so you can instantiate 10, 12 different buttons from the same HTML template. And the other great thing about that specification is it has something called slots. And with slots, you're able to compose larger web components out of smaller web components or smaller HTML elements. All right. So this is a quick code pen of what a custom element would look like. We just basically have our tag, hello world. And then there's an attribute in there with my name. And that's going to generate that HTML output. Now, if we take a look at the JavaScript for that, it's really not that complicated. So the hello world class is extending HTML element. And you're probably asking, why is it classes? Why are we using classes for this? Well, when the custom element specification came around, classes were the new hotness in JavaScript, but that's what was implemented. We're kind of stuck with that forever. So you just got to get over that. Anyway, so we extend the HTML element, and in our connected callback, which is basically a method that gets called whenever this thing ends up on the page, we're just going to get the attribute name and drop that into the inner HTML. So we're just generating that H1 for us. And then the most important piece is that custom element define. So anytime the browser sees hello-world, it knows to run that JavaScript class hello world in order to generate the content for us. So if we were to take a look, well, I forgot I got to click back there. If we were to take a look at what that seems like in the browser, it's just straight light DOM HTML like you're used to, because we're only using the custom element specification at this point in time. Now, when it comes to the shadow DOM, you can see that basically the method signature is exactly the same. We have the same tag name and attribute with Simon in there. But the JavaScript is way different, because what we're doing here is in the constructor for that class, obviously we have to call super. That's the first thing you have to do in every constructor. But then we're getting the attribute like we did in the previous thing. But we're creating all of that, all of those DOM elements using DOM manipulation APIs, and finally appending it into our shadow DOM. And then if you were to take a look at what that looks like in the browser, it looks a little bit different, because we still have the hello world tag in the light DOM, but now there's that boundary there, that shadow root boundary, and all of our content shows up in that shadow root boundary. So what's basically happening there is that you have two DOMs on this page at this point in time. And anything that's happening inside the shadow, so the shadow DOM does not affect what shows up in the light DOM and the rest of your application. So it's really good for encapsulation. And then finally, and this is kind of my preferred way to write web components, is by using slots. So instead of passing everything in by attributes, attributes should be used to modify behavior. They shouldn't be used to pass content in. That's just kind of a good rule to follow. So in this case, we have our hello world tag, but no longer are we passing in our attribute as content. We're passing in a span, and that's going to have a slot with a name of name. Wow, that's terrible to say out loud, isn't it? Anyway, the JavaScript for that looks quite a bit different. We're going to new up this template, and the template element is going to land on our web page. And then anytime we see the hello world tag, we're going to use that template to instantiate it. So in our constructor, again, we're calling super, and then we're going to attach our shadow DOM, and then we're just going to append the template into the shadow DOM. So the algorithm that happens there is it takes the light DOM content that you pass into the component and the template and merges them together in order to produce exactly the same output that we've seen before. And then when it comes to what that looks like in the browser, we kind of have this mix of two things. We still have our hello world tag, which is in the light DOM. We have our shadow root boundary, which has our H1 tag. And then we have that bit there that has the slot. But when this is actually shown to the user, that span gets put into where the slot is for you. So it's just a quick overview of the three different APIs that are used in order to do web components. Now, there are other APIs when it comes to web components, but these are the three ones that you can count upon. And of course, the thing is, when you're using web components, you don't have to use all of these APIs. If you just use one of them, then that's fine. They're still web components. All right, so why are web components useful? Well, that's a good question. Let's take a look at some of the reasons. Well, obviously, we have the component reuse and interoperability. So it allows us to define a component that we can package up and put up on NPM so people can use it. Better off, you just host it on your website and you have people use it over import maps, which is great. But also, they're very interoperable. So if you have a component, you can use it in your React application, your Vue application, your Angular application, or just your plain HTML application, because they're part of the platform. They'll work anywhere. So folks that are coming into web components, you don't have to adopt them as a complete rewrite of your application. You can take a button or something, any little component that you want to, try writing it as a web component and dropping it into your application to see how it feels. See if that actually works well for you. So you don't have to, do a complete rewrite. It's not like you're moving from next 12 to 13. Oh yeah, I just went there. All right. Also, it uses less JavaScript. Because many of the things that are in web components are part of the platform, you don't need to load a heavyweight JavaScript framework in order to instantiate these components. It's already part of the browser code, and it's running in C++, so that's going to be pretty fast. And they're accessible. Since we're just doing HTML components, they're going to take a lot of the accessibility that's already there as part of HTML elements themselves. So you don't have to, in a lot of cases, get in there and add a whole bunch of area or WCAG attributes. You're just going to use the elements as they already exist. All right, and they have a shorter learning path. So if you have a whole suite of web components, maybe you have a design system that's set up around them, you can actually give them to people without advanced JavaScript knowledge and say, hey, just use these as HTML elements and it'll work for you. And that's actually pretty cool. I know that, let's see, can I say this? I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in Spain. The government of Canada actually does that quite a bit. So there is a team there that has built a design system of web components, and they just hand them to HTML developers in order to create their content so that things look the same all across their different properties. And then the last point is the encapsulation. So again, just like you would with any React component, you get the encapsulation so that your styling and your behaviors are encapsulated into that component itself. All right. Now, as a quick aside, anybody here actually using web components? Okay, maybe 8 hands. All right. So, that's kind of interesting to hear because Google is tracking this thing. And as of 20 minutes ago when I pulled this updated data, it seems like there is about 20% of all page visits by Chrome include at least one web component. So you can see that point in time in 2021 where there was a huge jump in things. And I think that was when Google decided how to count these things slightly differently. But they're making slow incremental progress with web components being used. But is there any big companies using them? If you go to YouTube right now and you do a view source on that, you'll notice that there are a lot of custom elements on YouTube. Now, they were using an earlier version of things, but still, they're web components. I used to work for Adobe. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, Photoshop Web, if you've taken a look at that, that's completely built in web components. They have a design system called Spectrum, and all of their web components are built using that design system. And Photoshop is a fully web application using web components. And just recently, Microsoft updated their store. So if you go to buy an application from Microsoft, that desktop application is actually using web components instead of .NET or whatever the UI components they have. So, big companies are actually using these things as well. Now, all that being said, they have problems, like any technology. And what are they? We're all web developers here. So we've heard about the flash of unstyled content. You know that period of time where you load up your web page, but some of your external CSS and fonts haven't loaded yet, so the text doesn't look quite right, and then all of a sudden it snaps into view, and they're like, oh, that's what I actually wanted. Well, web components have a problem not unlike that as well, and it's called the flash of undefined custom element. And I didn't coin this term, Corey LaVisca did. But basically what's happening there is you have a web component defined in your HTML, and it gets loaded by the browser, and it goes, I don't know what to do with this yet because I haven't run the JavaScript. So it just treats it as a span, and it might look a little bit weird until that JavaScript gets executed. All right, so an example of what the flash of undefined custom element looks like. Now, I'll try to do this. So what you want to look for here, where it says hello Simon in red, I'm going to change it to hello Weiwei. And you're going to see is there's going to be black text with Weiwei and then it'll flash into hello, way, all in red. So let's give that a shot. And I can never, oh, look how bad I am at spelling. Ugh. All right. So did anybody see that? Please tell me somebody saw that. Anyway, I'll go back. I'll change it back to Simon. Just look for the black text. So you might have seen that flash there, but basically what's happening is the browser comes along, it knows that the content of that tag is the text Simon, it just displays it as plain black text, and then the JavaScript gets executed, in which case the styles are applied to it. So that's kind of frustrating when it comes to the flash of unstyled custom element. Right? I always remember I have to click off of CodePen to go to the next thing. And this is everything I just explained, so we're just gonna click through that really quickly. All right. The other issue with the shadow DOM is it doesn't play well with native forms. So when you're building a custom element, what you want to do is always to extend from HTML elements or extend from a base class that has HTML elements somewhere in its inheritance tree. The reason that you want to do that is because Apple won't let us have nice things. Wait, did I say that? Yeah, I did say that. Yeah, so Apple will not implement the specification that will allow you to extend from other elements. It will only allow you to extend from HTML element. Why is that important? Because you might want to extend from a button to get all of the default behaviors of a button, or from an input to get all the default behaviors in input, but Apple won't implement that for security. I don't know, the last time we talked to them, they said the position is stated. And I don't know what that is, but I think I can translate that into something that is not very nice. So I'm not gonna say it. All right. Also, form elements inside the shadow DOM are they're not in the same DOM. They're in the shadow DOM. They're in a completely different area. So any of the default behavior that you would have with those elements do not get bubbled up into the light DOM for you. So particularly like if you have built your own custom element button that you put inside a form and you expect anytime you hit enter in that form for your button to automatically execute the form submit, it just won't happen. It's not in the same DOM. And so if we take a look at this example, and I mean this one is really hard to prove because it's proving a negative, but I'm gonna hammer away at the enter key here, and absolutely nothing is happening. And the reason that is that button that is inside of our form is in the shadow DOM. So if we take a look at the JS for that, I've just created this button element that gets added into the shadow DOM. And because of that, none of the default form submission things bubble up into the light DOM, so we don't get all of that stuff. Ugh, that is really frustrating because you just want the web to work. All right, so how do we solve some of these problems? Well, that's a really good question. First and foremost, we have some solutions for this, and that guy's trying to sell us snake oil, so that's kind of scary. Anyway, for the flash of unstyled custom element solution, well, we can do something, and it's only in CSS. And the first thing that you would do is just set the custom element to not be defined. So anytime you come across anytime you come across a tag that is not defined in the browser, we just set it to hidden. And then eventually, once the JavaScript runs, then it will be defined, and therefore the CSS won't work, and you'll be able to see the element. So that's one way of doing things, but it's a bit ugly because instead of getting that flash of like black text that doesn't look right, you just get a white box where the custom element should be. And I'm really trying to open this water without spilling it all over the place. So you know what? Never mind. All right, we'll try again. Although there is another specification that's currently been implemented in, I believe, Edge, Chrome, and Safari, and that's declarative shadow DOM. So this gives us a way of server-side rendering components by defining the template as part of the HTML and not having to put it into JavaScript. And so that would be a really great way of avoiding that flash of undefined custom element. But the problem is right now is it's not defined in Firefox. All right. So this is a quick little example here of the declarative shadow DOM. As you can see, this is all an HTML solution. We still have our hello world tag to define our custom element. And inside of that, we have our template, which will define how everything should look, including our style and our HTML. And we tell it what type of mode we have with the shadow root. And in this case, we're just making shadow root open. There's basically two modes of the shadow root, open and closed. It's really not that important because no one will tell you to use a closed shadow root anymore. That was an old part of the spec. But basically, you can define your entire custom element in HTML at this point in time. And so that solves a lot of those problems because we don't need JavaScript to execute in order to fix that. And what that looks like in the browser is exactly how you would see any other element that is using the shadow DOM. We have our hello world tag in the light DOM. We have our shadow root with all of our contents in there. And then basically the light DOM content that we pass into the custom element itself. All right. But as I said, it's not supported in Firefox right now. So that is pretty unfortunate. There is good news on that front. There has been movement in Firefox's Bugzilla tracker to say that they are going to implement it. No dates on it yet, but hopefully sometime in 2024 we'll get around to seeing something like that, which would be really nice. All right. Now, when the shadow DOM doesn't play well with native forms, like how do we go about solving something like that? Well, this is a problem that was caused by JavaScript. So as maintainers, we ask for a solution. As the browser vendors, they give us the solution, and then we just die. Yeah, so the solution for a problem caused by JavaScript is to pour more JavaScript into your pages, which is not really what we want. We want things to work without JavaScript. Le sigh, le weep. All right. So what that looks like is there's a couple of specifications, and again, web components are a whole group of specifications called the form-associated custom elements and elements internals. So what we have here in this CodePen example that I'll show you is an implementation of these two things. Now, with the light DOM component, it's, well, let's take a look at the HTML. All right, so in our form, we have our light check mark and we have our shadow check mark. And so if I was to click on both of these folks and then do submit, everything's fine. We do reset, it's good. If I try to do this, it's going to complain that I haven't checked it. So things are working like checkboxes should be. That's great. Now, if we take a look at the light DOM checkbox, it's, let's get our name, let's create our constructor. We're just going to create an input in here, and we're just going to, shove that directly into the light DOM itself. That's great. So that's like, what, about 10 lines of code to encapsulate a light DOM checkbox? That's great. Now let's take a look at the shadow DOM checkbox. All right, so we have to basically set this static property, say that it is form associated. That's cool. Then we're going to create this private thing called internals and our private shadow root. And then in our constructor, we're going to attach the shadow mode. We're going to attach internals. We're going to set a whole bunch of values, including its role, its area checked, its inner HTML. We're going to do some query selectors just to get everything set up basically. All right, okay, that's kind of a pain. But then, it goes on and on and on. We actually have to add an event listener for the checkbox itself. It can't handle it. We have to do the form reset callback ourselves because we don't get the default behavior. We have to do the onChange callback itself because, again, we don't get the default behavior. And because of that, we have to set those area roles and the validity roles all ourselves. And then we still have to get down here to handle the implicit submit and then the toggle. And, we're like 40, 50 lines of JavaScript here just to implement a really shitty checkbox. I mean, I wish it was better, but that's the solution that they gave us. It's like, oh, hey, you want this stuff to work in forms? It's like, write a heck of a lot more JavaScript and still get worse behavior than you would if you just use HTML. So that's not what we want to see at all. All right. So is there a solution that we can use today? And this is kind of where we're getting to the crux of my talk. And then Albert Einstein, he once said, you can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking that created them. And to me, the kind of thinking that created a lot of these problems was over-reliance on client-side rendering. So we have to think in different ways. And that's where we get into server-side rendering, which is what part of the talk was about. So I actually work on this open source project. It's called Enhance. This is our mascot. Their name is Axel. It's a cloud axolotl. I got stickers if anybody wants them. It's super cute. But anyway, what Enhance is just, it's an HTML first framework which allows you to build web applications, to define custom elements that'll work both server-side rendered and client-side rendered. And it's built, using progressive enhancement from the very beginning. So we want to make sure that everything works HTML first, even before JavaScript gets loaded, but then you use JavaScript in order to enhance things. All right, so switching things over and taking a look at what the enhances flash of undefined custom element solution would look like, it's pretty much, the hello world is exactly the same. We're slotting in our span. But the JavaScript is a little bit different. So I'm importing the custom element package. We're extending that custom element instead of HTML element. But again, as long as your base class extends HTML elements somewhere down the line, in which case this thing does, you're OK. And then the only other thing that you have to do is to implement a render method. And the render method is where it's basically your template. So as long as you have your styles and your HTML in there, you're all set. And that render method will be called during the server-side rendering pass, and it will get added into the light DOM. And then eventually, when this JavaScript gets executed on the client, and we see that the hello world tag is there, we'll execute the JavaScript as well. And so this will work if you server-side render it with enhance first, or if you just take it into a CodePen like I have it right now, and it's being completely client-side rendered. The nice thing about that is it's one of the few times I can actually say that isomorphic JavaScript works. Now, you might have a question. It's like, well, if I server-side render it, then does it get rendered again on the client side? And the answer to that is no. There's an attribute that's added at the server-side rendering time to say that this thing's already been rendered. Don't do it again unless there's a change to one of the attributes. So it saves you that extra pass on the client side. So that is that's the client side. So for stopping the flash of unstyled custom element, so the browser requests the HTML, Enhance expands the custom element on the server, as well as hoisting any of your encapsulated styles into the head. That's another thing that we do on the server side. So all of those styles that are in your render method, using the way that you would specify styles, using like host or slotted or any of the other pseudo selectors in the shadow DOM, we'll actually properly scope them by changing those values into the tag name and then hoisting them up in the head. So that way, those styles are already available before your HTML even gets loaded. So it encounters this unknown element called hello world. The browser doesn't know what to do about it, but it's going to treat it just as like an inline element, like any other unknown element. But since the CSS is already loaded with that tag, it knows how to style it properly. So things actually look correct from the very beginning. So then finally, the browser loads the web component for all of the JavaScript, and your component is instantiated and it's enhanced at that point in time, hence the name, with any of the client-side behaviors that you need to add to it. But from the very beginning, things actually look and behave properly in an HTML-first type of manner. That's an old slide I should have got rid of. Now, when it comes to the shadow DOM versus forms solution, it's much the same thing. So again, we have my button, which is a JavaScript, but we're extending from custom element. Again, as long as we have our render method, all of this is getting like put into the light DOM at that point in time. And so this time, when I hit enter, I'm getting back the value that it has been submitted. So you're getting that default form behavior that you're looking for, which is fantastic in my opinion. And if I jump out of things, that's the old slide. So benefits of Enhance. All components are server-side renderable with no changes. As long as you extend the custom element and have a render method, then it's going to work both server-side and client-side, which is a huge benefit. You can leverage your CSS skills as you use right now and actually use the cascade into these components in order to be able to style them and still get the encapsulation that you normally would using the shadow DOM, but this time in the light DOM as well. And also, you can use slots without the shadow DOM. So one of the problems that folks run into when they're trying to do light DOM web components is you can't do slotting. You need the shadow DOM for that. But we've actually written things in such a way that if we see a slot, we know how to fit things in. Spoilers, we actually use the shadow DOM under the hood. So we use exactly the same algorithm that the browser does, and then we just take the output of that and put it into the light DOM for you, and forms work. And then you can avoid excessive JavaScript code by just leveraging the platform and existing web standards. And I think it was Francesco said that earlier today. You want to limit the amount of JavaScript as much as possible that ends up on your client, because that's going to cost you in the long run. So Thank you so much for coming to this talk. I feel like I sped through it super fast. And if you want to learn more about Enhance, that's where to go.